Okay, so we have installed the Nexus. This is where we have installed it. This is our Nexus installation directory. Inside this bin we have Nexus application. To run the Nexus, we have to be inside this directory in a command line. So you can see this is my working directory in the command line, this bin, and then from here I have to execute nexus.exe/run. So it will start the Nexus server. Now let's check one important file. In this etc, you can see this, there is a properties file. Let's open this file, and now you can see here these are the two very important properties for us. So basically Nexus by default listens to the port 8081. We can change this if we wish to, and this is the host. So 0.0.0.0 is currently there is, but if you want the Nexus repository to be started on your to be started on your IP address of the system, you can do so, but I am going to keep the defaults for now. And now let's access this server. So you can see here at the end, you will see it will take some time to start the server. So at the end in the command line you will see this kind of a message: started Sonata Nexus server. Now let's go in the browser. Let's go to the incognito mode and say localhost :8081. Just a second, let me see. Okay, what I'll do is I'll just change this application host to 127.0.0.1. so it is localhost. Basically this is a localhost. So let me just terminate the server and start it again. Okay, let me run the command again. Yes, yeah, it was executing. Just a minute guys, just a minute. Let's wait until the Nexus server starts.
Pranada, it's just asking to allow the access. Should we allow the access? It's a Windows security alert.
Yes, yes. Yeah, this is how it starts. Okay, so we are inside the Nexus repository, guys. This is the the UI of it. Now let's understand what is Nexus repository first of all. So basically Nexus repository is a server using which you can create different different private repositories. Now what I mean by that is, let's take an example of this MVN repository which we already had discussed about. Here, this is a public repository in the sense, if you deploy your Java library here, anyone would be able to download it, right, and use it. But if you want to have your own repository in your network, a private repository, usually these platforms like MVN repository, even npm.js, this repository, so this npm.js is for JavaScript packages, okay, MVN is for Java jar file libraries, then Docker Hub, right? So this Docker Hub is for Docker images. We would be talking about Docker, right? But these repositories, they are public repositories first of all, meaning if you deploy on this MVN repository, if you deploy your jar file, anyone would be able to download and use it. Even npm.js, if you deploy your JavaScript package here, anyone would be able to download and use. Even for Dockers, if you create your Docker image and push it here, anyone would be able to use it. You can create private repositories there. That's not a, it's not that everything what you deploy here would be always publicly accessed. No, there is an option to create the private repository also, but usually those are paid options. Okay, the point is those options are paid options usually. Okay, that is point number one. Point number two, many organizations, due to the security concerns and many other reasons, they don't allow any packages to be downloaded from internet. Like let's take an example of our calculator application, okay, which we are developing. So we need test.ng jar file, a dependency. Now that dependency, it will install it from the internet, like this location. But many organizations don't allow this, to download the packages or even Docker images from outside of the company network, right? Outside of the company network, from somewhere from the internet. So in all these cases, one, if you don't want to spend money to create a private repositories, second, for the company security, due to the company security policy or network policy, you are not allowed to download any packages or any Docker images from the internet. Then you have an option of setting up a Nexus server. Okay, so this Nexus server will allow you to create different repositories. So you can create a Maven repository to deploy your library jars. You can create your private Docker registry to push your Docker images. You can create your private npm.js repository to push your Node.js packages, right? That is the main use case of this server. Now let's sign in. Okay, so it says that the user is admin. You can see here the user is admin, and the password, it is saying that it would be located here. So let's go and get the password from there. So I'll just put this here, and this admin password is the file in which we have got this is our admin password. So let's put it here and sign in. Okay, let's set up the few things. So let's set a new password. So I will set it as admin 123 admin 123, simple password. Please set a simple password. Next, and now here, so for this anonymous access is like, do you want to provide an anonymous access, meaning anonymous means without any username password. If he or she tries to access your server, would you want to allow that or not? That is what anonymous is. So we would say disable anonymous access. So we do not want anyone to. So you can see here, enable anonymous access means that by default user can search, browse and download components from repositories without credentials, meaning without providing username and password. So do you want that, right? Or you want to disable it. So if you disable it, it will require credentials for all the users and our build tools, right? So let's disable the anonymous access and let's go to next and finish. Right, now let's go to here. Okay, now here you can create different repositories. So do you see here, create repository? So different kinds of repositories now we can create. Yes.
Pranay, I'm not able to execute the exe. It is giving me some error.
Okay, I'll just have a look at it in some time. Just let me just create a repository and then I'll look at the issue.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so let's create the repository. We want to create our own repository for our jar files. Okay, so I'll create a repository. Now here you can see we can create different kinds of repositories. Now you can see here Docker repository we can create. Do you see Docker here? Docker. There is Helm also. Helm is which we are going to learn when we will learn Kubernetes. Okay, so Helm packages we can also push in our own self-hosted repository. Now this is a Maven, what we want. So Maven hosted. So we will give some name to this repository. So let's say I will say DevOps batch 1 is the name. Now what you want this repository to be, so I'll just keep this as release. Then let's keep this as is. Let's scroll down a bit. Let's not change anything here. This is something very important. Now what this is, deployment policy. Now let's say you have created version 1 of our jar file. Okay, our calculator API. I will just show you there. Let's open Eclipse. Now what we are going to do is we are going to push our calculator API which we have created here. We are going to push it to the Nexus repository. Okay, now version 1, when we will create version 2, we will push it. Version 3, we will push it here. Okay, so as and when that library will be evolved with addition of different functionalities, we would be creating different versions and we would be pushing those versions. Like currently we are working on version 2. So we will package the jar file and we will deploy it over here to the repository created here in the Nexus. Now what this deployment strategy is, now if I say allow redeploy, meaning currently let's say I have created version 2.0 and I push it to the repository. So there would be a jar file deployed here. Now again, if I do few changes into the library code, let's say I fix few bugs, let's say I added a few more functionalities, and if I create again version 2.0, same version, and if I deploy it onto the Nexus repository, so should Nexus allow me to override the existing version with the new one or not? Okay, should Nexus allow me to override the existing version which is there in the repository with the new one coming in? That override should be allowed or not is what this setting is about. Okay, so usually if you are creating a repository which your users are going to use your library from, then usually this redeploy should be disabled. Otherwise, your users are currently using that library, and then if you do some changes and you override the existing one which the users are using, that may create problem for them. Like if that particular library has any issues, okay, so that will cause an impact on the usage of that library for your users. So depending upon, like if you are creating this repository for your internal testing purpose, let's say, then you can allow the redeploy. Allowing the redeploy will also, it does also serves one purpose. Let's say you are testing, you are developing the library, so you are releasing it for the QAs, and QAs, they are raising the bugs, then you are fixing those bugs, and then instead of creating a new version, because if you create a new versions for even smaller fixes which you do not want to track, by the way, right? So if you don't allow the redeploy, what will happen is always you have to create a new version and push it to your repository. Always you have to do some fix, and after that fix you will have to release a new version. That will consume the space in your Nexus server. Okay, so this decision whether you want to allow or disable, that depends upon who is going to use your repository. If it is a production repository which the users are going to use, then don't allow the redeploy, so that existing, like if the developers do any modifications, changes, and they should not be able to override the current release with the new one. Okay, otherwise it will cause an issue at the customer's end or the user's end. But if you are creating the repository for internal testing purpose, like you are developing, creating the library, testers are testing, raising the bugs, developers are fixing the bugs again, so allow the redeploy so that you don't have to create a new release, new version, by the way, for every small fixes. Okay, so for now let's disable the redeploy. Cleanup policy, this is also very important point. Now what is this cleanup policy? Now usually what happens is, like, we release the versions, right? We release version 1.0, then 2.0, then 3.0, right? So a certain time, at certain time, the Nexus server storage starts getting filled, and your Nexus server soon may get out of storage. Okay, if you just keep on releasing, at a certain time it will go out of memory storage. So you can define the cleanup policy. Cleanup policy means you can tell Nexus server that which libraries it can safely delete. For example, if there are any library over here which has not been used since last 6 months or 1 year maybe. Okay, you can decide the time limit. Okay, let's say you want to delete those libraries which have not been used since last 1 year. So you can set the cleanup policy, and accordingly Nexus will release those, right? I'll show you how to create a cleanup policy, but cleanup policy is which tells Nexus, okay, this is something you should always set, otherwise sooner or later your Nexus server will go out of storage. Okay, so this is a good practice to set up a cleanup policy, and that you can decide within a team that what should be the cleanup policy, what should be the time limit, okay, that you want to consider to clean up the resources there. Usually this problem happens with the Docker images, because Docker images are quite huge in size, and if you just keep on releasing new Docker images, then soon Nexus server goes out of storage. So you should first have the cleanup policy set, and also the redeploy also, this decision also should be taken wisely. If you do not want to keep the different versions of your releases, then it's better to set redeploy and ask your developers not to create new versions but to override the existing version from the repository with the fixes. Okay, so I'll just say create repository. So this is our repository. Okay, this is our repository, and this is the URL of our repository. Now let's go and set some cleanup policy. So here you can create a cleanup policy. So I'll just say create. I'll say cleanup Java jars. So it's a Maven. So I'll say Maven 2. So our repository type is Maven 2 basically, for which we are defining a cleanup. And here you can specify the cleanup criteria. So release. Our repository type is release. So I have defined the release type as release here. Now here you can specify what should be the age of the component which should be considered to be cleaned up. So I would say published over maybe 10 days ago. Depending upon the usage also you can set. So let's say if there is some component which has not been used since last 30 days. So better to set this, because it usually doesn't matter when we have published it. Okay, usually what matters to us for taking up this decision of cleanup is, are there any usages of this particular library or a component? If no one is using since last 30 days, so it means like we don't need it anymore, right? So then you can save. So I have saved the cleanup policy. Now we can attach this cleanup policy to our repository which we have just created. So let me go here and let's scroll down, and here I can attach this cleanup policy to my repository by just shifting it to the applied section. And let's see. So our libraries, okay, when we will now start deploying the libraries here now, once a particular library usage goes over 30 days, means like no one has downloaded or accessed that library for a period of 30 days, it would be automatically removed from our repository. That is what cleanup policy is. Okay, then if we go down here, we can create different users. Like usually in a organization, when you set up a repository, someone works as an administrator, and the other people, other developers, fellow developers, they just use it for deploying their libraries over here. So you can create the users for each one of them here, and you can provide the access to them according to the needs. Let's say there are few developers in your team who works on JavaScript projects, few people works on Docker images, few people works on Java libraries. So you will have 3 repositories created here, one for JavaScript packages, one for Java jar files, and the third one for the Docker repository, Docker images I mean. So the people working with Java, so they would be requiring an access to your Java repository or Maven repository. People working with JavaScript packages, they would be only requiring an access to your JavaScript repository, and people working on Dockers, they would be only requiring an access to Dockers, right? So you can create different users here. So our current user is administrator. Let's create one more user. I'll show you also how to create it. You can say, I'll say Pranad ID. Then let's put a last name, then email ID, and then the password which you want to provide to this user to log in the system. Okay, so I'll just keep simple Pranoday 123, Pranoday 123, and status active. So let's say if someone, there is a user which a particular developer is using, and now let's say he left your team, got shifted to some other team. So instead of deleting his user, you can deactivate that person's user from here, disable it, right? And later you can delete also. Now what kind of role you want to provide to this particular user? Okay, so now let's create a role, because this admin role will provide the administrative rights to a particular user for a repository, meaning he would be able to delete the repository, he would be able to maybe delete the artifacts from there, which we usually do not want to give these kinds of rights to our fellow developers, right? Those developers should only be able to download the library, they should be able to push. Now there could be a few developers you want to give them the rights to push the libraries, other junior developers you want to restrict their access only, they should be able to only download the libraries, they should not be able to push, right? So we should not give admin rights. So let's create a role. I need to discard these changes because we need to first create the roles. So let's first create the role. So I would say Nexus role. Let's not do LDAP. Yeah, Nexus role. I would say Java developer, Java senior developer, I would say. I'll give the same name here. Developer should be able to pull and push the artifacts to Maven repository. This is the description I have provided. Now here we can give the privileges. Okay, so let's scroll down a bit. And we will, now these are, you can see these are the rights related to our DevOps batch repository which we just created. Now this NX admin will provide the administrative privileges which we do not want to provide. Now this view will provide the view privileges, like they would be able to browse the repository, right? Then this, they will be able to add the new artifacts to the repository. So I will just provide, now as we are creating a role for a senior dev, so we want that developer to be able to add the artifacts, right? Then browse also we want to provide. Maybe we do not want to provide any delete rights to anyone, neither senior nor junior. Delete rights should only be with the administrator of the repository. Otherwise anyone would go and delete the artifacts from there, which usually we do not want to happen, right? So let's not provide the delete rights. We have provided the browse rights. Now these read rights and browse rights, these are different things. Browse means that person would be able to browse the repository from the browser, and the read write is he should be able to download the artifact. So we want our senior developer to be able to download the artifacts. He should be able to add, means publish the new artifacts or release the new versions of our library here, and he should also be able to browse the repository from the browser. Okay, so I have created this rule. Let's go down. So which role we want this? Yeah, just a minute, I am just going up and see. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Now let me scroll down. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we do not want this, and let's see. Okay, so I have created a Java senior developer role. Now let's go back to our users. Let's create the user which we had left previously. So I'll set on the D. I'll give the name. Now let's define an email. I will keep a simple password, DAY123, simple. Status should be available, active. Let's scroll down and let's assign the role which we have just defined, right? So this particular user will have the rights which we have just defined in this role of he should be able to browse our recently created Maven repository, he should be able to read the artifacts from there, and he should be able to download the artifacts too. Now when you will be creating a junior developer role, you want that person to be only be able to read the artifacts and browse the repository. Say you do not want to give him the rights to push the artifacts to the repository. That vests only with the senior developers. Usually that is what the case is. So I'll say create local user. Now the user has been created. Now let's log in with this user. Okay, I'll sign out and let's log in. Okay, the T it is. Yeah, so you can go and check in the browse. You can see I am able to browse the repository. I would also be able to browse it using that. Now there are no artifacts as of now, but we can browse this repository with the help of, I will show you that also. Let me take the URL of this. Now let me go. Now I have logged in with the administrator. Let me go to my repository, not from here, but from here. Repositories, I'll go inside here. I'll just take this URL. This is the URL of our repository. Let's sign out. Okay, let me so it will ask me. I am trying to browse the repository, so it is asking me the username and password, so I just put it. Now I am able to now as there are no artifacts as of now, that's why I am getting this error, but as and when we will push the artifacts, we would be able to see those. Okay, now let me go and log in with the administrative credentials. Now what we want to do is next that we want to integrate our Maven with this repository. Like when I will run a deploy goal, okay, deploy goal, then my jar file, a library jar file, should get deployed to the repository which we just created. That is our goal. Next goal is, okay, so inside this repository, I should be able to deploy my artifact or my jar file. Okay, that is our goal. So we want to integrate this repository with Maven. Okay, and that is when we are going to discuss about settings.xml, and then we are also going to discuss about the different configurations we need to put in the POM XML. Currently in our POM XML, the remote repository has not yet been configured. So we are going to configure this as a remote repository. Local repository always stays on your system in your .m2 folder, but remote repository is this, like Nexus repository or Maven repository. These are remote repositories. So we are going to configure our remote repository in the POM XML, and we are also going to do few configurations in settings.xml related to our remote repository. Okay, so that is what our next goal, which we are going to talk about in our next session.